Absolutely. Let's do it for sure.
Are we live? All right. Well, welcome to the October session of Business as Unusual, Talent Strategies in a Recessionary Environment. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, but I wanted to do a little housekeeping before we jump in. So if you're attending via our live stream, Dana Kramer will be managing the chat, so please feel free to use the chat to add your questions and she will feed them to us today. So I am Kathy Steele. I'm the CEO of Red Caffeine. And for those of you unfamiliar with Red Caffeine, we are a growth consultancy, and it's our mission to build badass brands that people want to work for and with. With what is your organization's best opportunity for growth? There are really many options, but building the right strategy to improve your business performance can be really daunting. So we help companies build a strategy to accelerate growth by evaluating which path is right for your business. Our offering includes a managed service team that enables a business to scale rapidly without hiring a wide range of full-time staff members to move a growth plan forward. And so today we're going to be talking about one of the hottest topics many businesses are struggling with, the human capital growth lane. So welcome. So I first want to jump in and introduce my co-host. So if you've attended BAU before, you will remember Mary Lynn Fayomi. And Mary Lynn's the president and CEO of HR Source. And they're a Chicago-based employers association with over 1,200 member organizations. So she's seen and heard it all. She's a highly respected speaker, trainer, advisor, and authority on various workplace issues, including culture, employment trends, and HR management. She's a prolific writer quoted and published regularly in a variety of industry publications. And she currently serves on the World at Work board of directors and is the past chair of the board of directors for both the Association Forum and of Chicagoland and the Employer Association of America. Mary Lynn was recently honored by Crane Chicago Business as a notable leader in HR. Congratulations on that honor. That's a big deal. And then we're super excited to invite Tim Schumm today. He is the founder and president of Lucas James Talent Partners, and he's our guest expert. So in 2019, that's not too long ago, Tim started Lucas James Talent Partners, offering a unique approach to the antiquated recruitment industry, providing an on-demand, cost-effective, dedicated offering that saved customers 40 to 60% compared to his competitors. So it's no wonder that in just 3 years, Tim has led Lucas James to over 100 internal employees, 12 million plus annualized revenue, placing over 500 plus people into their next career opportunity, and becoming the go-to partner for the Chicago technology community to help them scale up their teams during rapid growth periods. So welcome to both of you. So I always love to start, by asking our guest, what's not in your bio, Tim? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, you did such a great job. Nice to meet everybody. Thanks for everyone for joining. Marilyn, nice to meet you, and excited to spend a little bit of time together to talk about this topic. There's a multiple changing landscape that's kind of going on right now. I've been in the talent and recruitment space for 16 years. This is kind of all I know. I saw the 2008, 2009 cycle, the period of growth beyond that, the last 10 years of boom cycle. So especially in the last 2 years, we've seen just a bunch of different variables that have led to some growth for companies like ours, that led to some challenges for companies out in the field. And I'm just excited to talk about this topic. It's something I'm super passionate about, and looking forward to jumping in.
Yeah, I mean, I remember prepping for your session, and your growth, acceleration was so interesting. We probably could have done a whole hour on what you learned during those growth years. So excited to jump into this topic today. But so there is a lot going on. Even just thinking about the tail end of 2021 and what we were experiencing in the talent landscape then, and then now where we're at. So why don't we step back and talk about some of those macro trends that we're seeing, and Tim, have you kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. So, although I'm a leader in the talent community and we deal with recruitment and different industries and things like that, just a personal kind of preference of mine, I just like to follow the markets. I watch CNBC videos during lunch. I watch CNBC Squawk Box in the morning. I read the Wall Street Journal. What's going on in the economy is just very, 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 very interesting at the moment. There's just a lot of different dynamics that are happening right now. So I talked to my team about this. We actually have 170 employees, and we deal with a lot of different industries, and certain industries are getting hit a little bit harder, and some industries aren't really being affected right now. So I found myself on Mondays just talking to my team about the economy, what's going on with inflation, what's going on with unemployment. So I thought for your audience, maybe we could kind of start high level from a macroeconomic standpoint. The title of this is Talent Strategies in a Recessionary Environment. Are we in a recessionary environment? Are we not? I think there's just a lot of questions around that, and depending on how much you follow this stuff, you may not know. And for some people, this might be a little bit redundant. So let's take a quick step back. So coming out of the 2008 2009 recession, 2010 was kind of a little bit of a rebound year. But if you take a step back and look at it, we've been in a 10-year bull run that has been very, very, very frothy in a lot of different contexts, right? And if you look at the average in, recession, it's about 7 months, or excuse me, it's about 11 months on average. And we hit a recession in recent history every 7 years. So there's a 7-year cycle of boom times, and then there's a maybe 11-month period of down times, and then another 7-year cycle of boom times. So the point of this slide here is to show we're kind of due for something right now, right? It's been 10 years. There's been a lot of froth in the market, and we'll kind of get into some of the subsets of that. But if you look at this chart, the 2020 recession, you might be saying, hey, Tim, we just had a recession 2 years ago. And if you look at that dynamics of that recession that we went into, it kind of doesn't count, unfortunately. When we're looking at macroeconomic trends and liquidity in the financial markets and boom times and interest rates and things of that nature, 2020 wasn't really affected. The 2020 recession was a pandemic infused senior leadership of countries shutdown, which caused a recession in economic activity. And that was very short lived, right? So you could look at that and say, hey, we had a recession. We shouldn't have one for another 7 years, but unfortunately it didn't count, right? So we're due for one of these cycles. So let's go to some of the dynamics of the 10-year bull market. If you want to go to the next slide. The first is the advent of the private equity industry. So if you're unfamiliar with private equity, essentially what that is, these are investment bankers that are raising private funds, rich people, endowments, companies, creating funds, and then they're going out and they're buying majority, minority, or all-out acquisitions in private industry, right? So this started about 25 years ago. It's seen huge growth over the last 10 years. So what they do is they buy companies, they create efficiencies, they inject capital for growth. So a lot of the growth that we've seen is a direct reflection of just this dichotomy within private equity. It causes efficiencies. We're investing capital for growth. It causes things to go up. It causes some confidence in the market, and that trend will continue, I believe, over time. But we're kind of at that point now where we've seen such an injection of capital due to low interest rates in the private equity industry that we're just kind of due for a little bit of a reset. If you want to go to the next slide, there's a subset of the private equity industry that's super interesting. So if you're sitting in a technology company, you're sitting in the technology industry, you work for a startup before, a subset of private equity is what's called venture capital. So venture capital has also seen a huge increase over the last 10 years. These are investment dollars that are being allocated not to just every industry, but specifically to technology companies. And if you were to look around at all the industries, and economists will say we might have some growth in healthcare, we might have some growth in manufacturing or consumer goods. When you look 10 or 20 years out, there's not a lot of industries that aren't going to be tied to technology and new industries that are being created because of technology. This is a huge sector of our economy in the US and globally as well. And over the past 10 years, we've seen an increase in dollars invested in this space, increase in hiring, increase in labor market dynamics. And again, we're now due, and we'll get into some of the dynamics of what's going on in the technology sector, specifically related to venture capital, that's causing a little bit of gyrations in the market. If you want to go to the next slide. Again, we're just talking about kind of macroeconomic trends. So this chart, if you can't see it, it's essentially what the Federal Reserve funds rate is. If you don't know what the Federal Reserve Bank is, it's essentially a central bank. It dictates two things. They have a two-step strategy. They want to keep inflation low, and they want to keep unemployment low. That's what they are set out to do. Now, what they do is they set what the interest rates are for our economy. So this dates back to 1982. So interest rates were like 12, 14%. So if you heard like back when, I don't know, your parents bought their first house, mortgage rates were like 14, 15%. You had to put a lot of money down on cash to even if you wanted to buy a house. And then interest rates have continued to become lower and lower and lower and lower. So when interest rates are lower, banks can then go borrow money at a much lower rate. They can offer money to businesses like mine and yours. They can inject that into growth, which causes hiring stuff and causes a frothy market and things like that. We've been dealing with a very, very, very low interest rate environment for a very, very, very long time. And when money is cheap and when interest rates are low and people can go buy houses at 2%, mortgage rates and things like that, or I as a business can go borrow money at 4 or 5 or 6%. I'm going to be more advantageous in investing that capital into growth. And we saw that all across the industry. Every company, every individual saw this. And this has been going on for a very, very long time. And this is something that I'll come back to in terms of how the Federal Reserve is affecting the economy right now and potentially causing recession. So we'll get back to that. If you want to go to the next slide. Cool. All right. Characteristics of an overheated market. This could be pre-2001. This could be pre-2008, 2009. This could be kind of like right now, or at least the last couple of years, right? Low interest rates. I talked about that. Cheap money invested into riskier assets. Speculative assets and industries. So you probably heard a little bit about like Bitcoin and NFTs and, hey, I'm going to invest in this startup and it's going to go to the moon and it's going to IPO and it's for sure going to make a lot of money, or meme stocks. When money is cheap, stuff tends to get invested into riskier assets. And then everybody thinks that everything's going to go up and everything's going to go up forever. And we have this confidence in this bull run economy that quarter over quarter, we're just going to apply the same playbook. We're going to grow, we're going to grow, we're going to grow. And then unfortunately, a recession hits and then we have to change our playbooks, which we'll get into in a second. Low unemployment. Everybody's got a job. Everybody that wants a job has a job. Rising wages due to that unemployment and the labor market dynamics. If there's a war for talent, how do you attract more people? You increase their wages to attract them to your company or have them be retained at your company. Inflation, again, we'll get into this in a second. And one thing that's very interesting is fraud. So every time that there's like a boom economy that's kind of going on and everybody's excited and no one's looking really under the hood of what's going on, you tend to see bad actors taking advantage of certain situations in the economy, right? So Bernie Madoff is an example in 2008. Right? When everything was good, no one was looking under Bernie's hood to see what was kind of going on right there, right? And then that happened. Now regulation comes in. So next cycle, things tend to move a little bit more smoothly, right? Going back to the 2001, 2002 recession, Enron, everything was good, right? No one was looking at what they were doing. No one was really looking at their financial statements. Fraud happened. Now people are looking under the hood a lot more. We put in regulation. The next cycle that we have is just going to be a little bit more smoother. If you go to the next slide, please. The first portion of this is going to be a little bit slide heavy. Then we're going to get into some dialogue, but we want to kind of set the stage. So where we're at today, 2022 or 2023, are we in a recession? I think you probably, unless your head is in the sand, you probably read a headline. Are we in a recession right now? Or is there going to be a recession in 2023? Or you're starting to feel it a little bit more? You might have a neighbor that got laid off that was in the tech sector, or something's kind of amok at the moment. And you might be asking yourself, okay, what is kind of going on? So today we're dealing with massive inflation. Okay. So inflation is due to a lot of different factors, but when you look at inflation, it's basically that prices are going up. And when prices go up, there's only two things that can happen. Either demand is higher than supply, so companies are raising their prices due to high demand, or supply is lower at the same demand. So people that have a limited supply, they're going to raise their prices, right? So unfortunately, at the moment, especially the last 2 years, both dynamics are happening, right? We've had a lot of demand. We injected a lot of money into the ecosystem. We injected a lot of government money. We had a low interest rate, so people were borrowing a lot of capital that increased demand. We were at our houses in the pandemic, so once we kind of like got out into the community a little bit more, we're spending a little bit more. Demand's really high, and unfortunately, due to COVID, our supply chain issues across the globe and specifically in this country are very dramatic, right? So when China shut down, when Europe shut down, when we have the Ukraine-Russia issue, and then we're kind of cutting off oil supply that used to come from Russia, there's this global dynamic that's happening where a product that has 10 widgets, and widget A comes from China and it has to go to Europe to be assembled and then kind of go across the seas to the US, and then eventually kind of gets, after a train or a truck, get into the retail store. It's slowing down that dynamic, right? So we have supply chain issues across most industries that are increasing pricing. As a result, and we'll get into the labor market dynamics here, when the labor market is tight and companies cannot get talent, what do they have to do? They have to raise wages. They have to raise prices. And when you raise a big input like wages, your profits are going to be lower. So you're probably going to raise prices to offset that and pass that on to the consumer and pass that on to the business that you're providing business goods or services to, right? Federal Reserve is going to be raising interest rates. They already have. They've raised it from 0% to 3%, onwards to 5% plus at the moment. So what they're looking to do here, which is very unfortunate for all of us, is that they're trying to cool the economy. They're trying to get that demand side down, so pricing goes down. They have to cool inflation. We cannot have inflation increase 8% year over year over year over year over year. This is going to affect, if it hasn't already, all of us. And we've already seen this in the grocery store. We've seen it if we wanted to go on a vacation. We've seen it in every area of the economy, at the gas station. We've seen this at every area of the economy. Eventually, something's going to crack, where people are going to start making business and personal decisions of, hey, things are costing more. I'm going to start to spend less, right? And when that happens across the entire globe, there's a lot of problems there. So we have to get inflation down. And how do we do that? We raise interest rates to cool demand. So unfortunately, the only thing they can do is raise interest rates. And unfortunately, what that does is it's going to cool demand. It's going to slow the economy down. And that's why when we're trying to predict what the next 6, 9, or 12 months is, we know that they're raising interest rates, which is causing this uncertain environment that we're about to head into. And we just don't know if it's going to be severe or mild. We also have global instability. I'll hit on this real quick. Everybody's probably watched what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. That can't end soon enough. If you look over in Europe, some of the dynamics that we're dealing with in the US are probably 2 or 3x over there. They're going through a recession right now, and their inflation is almost double what we have here in the US. So all the issues that we're dealing with, they're dealing with to a multiple degree, and eventually that's going to kick around the globe and eventually kick around to us. Want to move to the next slide? Hopefully this isn't boring, people. Hopefully this isn't too redundant. So next we're going to look at the labor market dynamic. There are some I geek out on this stuff. There's some very interesting longer term effects on the labor market that are going to impact all of us, whether we're an employee somewhere, we're a business leader, we're in HR. And the interesting thing about what's going on now is, Kathy, we were talking about this before we went live, that the economy is slowing down. We've had 2 quarters of decreased GDP. I would imagine Q3 is going to be down as well. I would imagine Q4 is going to be down as well. But unemployment's going down. With all that happening, we still have labor market tightness, right? And you might be asking yourself why, or is this part of a longer term trend? So the first slide here, and the first variable of this, is the baby boomer generation is starting to get to retirement age, right? So if you can't read what this chart says, essentially it's the percentage of the overall population that's retiring year over year. And you're kind of starting to see this go up. And the overall population is very much tied to the baby boomer population because they're the ones retiring, right? So the purple line and the orange line. The baby boomer population started retirement in 2008. And over the last 10 years, they've started to retire and leave the workforce, right? And it's getting to the point where that entire generation is starting to retire in droves, right? The baby boomer population, I don't know, we probably have some folks on this call. We probably have some parents that are in the baby boomer generation. Essentially, if you don't know what baby boomer generation is, they just had a lot of kids back then. I don't know, my dad was one of 7. My mom was one of 8. Like, that was normal. I got a ton of cousins. Like, I have 2 kids and I'm done, right? And I think that dynamic has kind of changed over time, right? So the first is we are losing our largest population of the workforce right now. They're at the peak of their experience level. They have the most knowledge. They are potentially managers or leaders, right? And they're exiting the workforce. And now we have other generations that have less population trying to offset that. Now, the interesting thing, and I'm going to talk about this in the next slide, if you see that purple line over the last 2 years, there's been a disconnect. We've had other folks outside of the baby boomer population retiring. What? they're leaving the workforce. Like, you only leave the workforce when you retire, right? Like, we kind of get in our heads that should be at like 62 or 65 and you're on Social Security. We have a major effect that's happening right now in the labor market, where not only is the baby boomer population the largest population that we have, we also have others that are leaving as well. So I'm going to get into one variable of the reason for that if you want to go to the next slide. So again, this is the generational wealth gap chart. It's a busy slide. Without having to read everything, essentially what it says is the baby boomer generation has 53% of all the net worth in the entire country, right? So folks in their late 50s, 60s, and 70s have pretty much the majority of the wealth that's in the country. So what happens when they retire and they slow down? And what happens when they unfortunately pass on, right? That gets transferred. That gets transferred initially to their spouse or their next of kin, and then eventually that gets passed on to their children, correct? Right? So we have this very, very interesting dynamic. And I think the stat is somewhere between 30 and $70 trillion over the next 8 to 10 years is going to be transferred from this generation to their kids in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, right? So anecdotally, I'm unfortunately not going to benefit from this, which sucks. But some of you may, and teach their own. And this is, I'd like to passing on to my kids, right? I think that's a dynamic that we all kind of think about. But if you had it in your head that you were going to retire at 60, and then your mom and dad gave you $1 million, and then your spouse's mom and dad gave you another $1 million, that's going to change the retirement calculator, especially if you go through the pandemic, where everybody's mortality is coming kind of top of mind, how you want to live your life, being cooped up at your house, right? We have a lot of people that are exiting the workforce right now due to this, and that is going to continue at least over the next 8 to 10 years. That's going to keep the labor market tight. There's way more points around this. I'm going to hit on one more if you want to go to the next slide. I'm going to hit on a few more, actually. The next is the immigration dynamics in our country. If you want a growing, booming economy, you need workers. You need workers to produce the product. You need workers to write the code for all the software that gets kind of put out into the economy. A major variable of this that's happened over the last 30 years is that our immigration policies, we've had people entering the workforce at all the levels of the economy. So we've had the hourly folks that are kind of coming in and staffing our stores, the distribution centers, or restaurants. We've had the skilled kind of trade folks kind of come in, and all the way up to knowledge workers, folks coming in from universities, from countries all across the globe into the United States and adding to our workforce here. As you can see from this chart, due to policies over the last, what would be 6 years, this is going down dramatically, and the trend is continuing that it's going down dramatically. So we have all these labor market dynamics that are kind of happening. We got baby boomers retiring. We have other folks that aren't baby boomers that are exiting the workforce right now. And then a huge percentage of our inbound year over year workforce is continuing to decline, right? So right now, yeah, there might be an economy issue or things like that. Unemployment's still low. Weird. So this isn't going to last forever. When this rebounds, if you're a business leader, you're in HR, you need to be ready for this, right? Because the playbooks that you were used to in the past, it's just going to continue to get tighter and tighter and tighter, and you're going to be competing against everybody else. There's 4 more points I want to hit on if you want to move to the next slide in terms of the labor market dynamic. All right, so the first is remote working. This is a super interesting concept to me. The labor market is just like any other market. It's due to factors based on supply and demand, right? So right before the pandemic, pretty much up until March of 2020, most organizations had on-site workforces, right? So as an HR leader or business leader, and you need to go find workers to work for your company within your industry, your candidate pool was a finite amount of people within a 20 to 30 mile radius of your worksite location. On the flip side, if you're a worker in ABC industry, you probably only had a handful of companies that were in your industry that would probably made a lot of sense for you to work for. We see this in a lot of industries where there's only like 5 competitors in the Chicagoland metropolitan area, and they just kind of like steal each other's people all the time. And that dynamic has always been very prevalent. You only had a finite amount of companies that you could work for within 20 to 30 mile radius of your home location. So that all got flipped upside down, right? So pretty much overnight, if you're a candidate and you had 10 to 20 opportunities that you could go find. That's now 100x, right? The world is your oyster. You could work from home, but now these companies are interested in picking you up if you live in Missouri and your employer happens to be in New York. It doesn't matter anymore. Same thing for employers, right? Your candidate pool is going to increase. I think one thing in terms of the micro labor market dynamics here, many of us have work from home policies. Great. Many of us have hybrid policies. That's great too. But if it's hybrid, you still need to be kind of within some sort of commutable distance to the worksite location, or you need to be on site. I think the point here is just know that this is jamming up the labor market indefinitely for the foreseeable future, because I don't think this is going to go away. Might not be 100% like it was in March of 2020, but depending on what your company is doing in terms of on-site versus hybrid, just know that your micro candidate pool for your opportunities might be lower depending on the policies that you have. The next is the gig economy. So when we talk about people exiting the workforce, there's this new way of working now where people are exiting full-time employment, but they're picking up other opportunities, either for a bunch of different gigs that are now their full-time employment, or they're only partially in the workforce altogether. They're just not W-2 employees that are being counted anymore. So our Uber drivers or DoorDash drivers, right? Freelancers, companies like Upwork. There's just so many different platforms in the boom of the internet that you could go work from home on projects part-time when you want, how you want, that there's just not as many W-2 candidates that are out there as much anymore, right? And this is a trend that's going to continue, and we just need to adapt accordingly. The next is the skill trade, the skilled trades, I should say. So if you're a manufacturing company, you need to hire a plumber, you need to hire an electrician. Back to the baby boomer generation, this is kind of like the last generation where there was an influx of people joining the trades compared to other industries. And now as these individuals retire, that labor market's going to be on a micro level extremely tight. So if you have these skill sets within your company, you have to kind of work around that accordingly. And the last thing that I'll mention is wages. We could talk about wages for an hour. What I will say is it's not as variable as you might think as other supply and demand dynamics. So you might think like, oh, there's a recession, or the unemployment number is going to go up. So there's going to be people that are more likely to take less pay. They may in the short term, but longer term, there's a huge floor in terms of salaries and wages for folks. It never really goes backwards, right? So wherever we're at today, if that had to increase over the last 2 years, we're at this new normal, and we need to operate our companies at this new normal because it's not going to go away, right? You might be able to pick up a couple employees here or there at lower wages than you are now, but they're probably going to leave on you because the company down the street isn't adopting that policy. All right, next slide. I'll just finish real quick on this. Current state, stock market hit a high in January 2020 or 2022. If you have a 401k, you probably know this. You're just down. You're just down 20% probably overall if you're in the Dow. If you have any tech companies, those are down 50 to 70%. The market is typically a predictive indicator of what's going to happen in the general economy. So I think we need to kind of follow that a little bit and kind of brace ourselves for maybe strategies around this, which we'll talk about more. There's a deep recession in the tech sector. They're talking about this being .com 2.0 in the tech sector. So we could get into this if you'd like, but essentially all the high flying in the venture capital industry over the last 10 years just kind of came to roost. Unfortunately, we realize these companies aren't profitable. If they do IPO, they're probably not going to be valued what they thought they would be, because the NASDAQ, unfortunately, is down 50 to 70%. And that trickles down from Series D, Series C, Series B, seed companies right now. Their ability to raise capital, they just can't right now. So these companies are basically funded to continue to grow because they can't fund themselves. So there's a deep recession in that sector, although there might not be other recessions in other industries. Supply chain issues we talked about, inflation, unemployment. What is the Federal Reserve going to do? We're in an uncertain environment. So I'll kind of end there. If you want to pull the slides down, and Kathy, I'll pass it over to you if you have any questions on what I presented or any other areas you want to talk about.
Well,
Yeah, I'm going to let
Go ahead, Kathy.
No, I said I'm going to let you take the first stab.
Sounds good. Good. Oh my gosh, Tim, you make economics fun.
Thanks.
Not an easy thing to do. So I have so many questions. First of all, talk a little bit more about this term frothy. Like, I like my cappuccinos frothy, but talk to us a little bit about what specifically frothy means, and then I'll delve a little bit more into, does that mean employers should be hiring or tightening their belts in response to what's happening in the economy?
Well, I think, the term frothy, I'll just kind of get to that. It could be used for frappuccinos. Those could be frothy, or anything could be frothy. And I think other adjectives to describe frothy are overextended, confidence in growth. I think the economy is a direct reflection of psychology and how people think, right? And I think we're seeing it now, which I'll get to your question on what people should do. But when things are good, like, you just get in this mindset as individuals, as companies, that we can do no wrong, right? You make an investment and it goes up, right? Or you make a business move and then the revenue goes up. You just get in this positive psychology and this positive mindset, which is great. But when everybody's in that positive mindset, and when you look under the hood, there might be external factors that are making those individual decisions frothy that might not actually be frothy. It's going to come to roost at some point, right? So I think we've now pivoted. So if you look at like the CEO confidence report, like, it's declined quite a bit. Like, CEOs are not very confident right now. CFOs are not very confident right now. It's also psychology on the other end, right? Because when you look at some of the data, unemployment's low. People are still spending money. Like, most industries aren't affected. Yeah, tech got out of whack, but most industries aren't affected. This psychology of like, oh my gosh, is there going to be a recession? Should I tighten? My plan was to hire a lot. I'm scared because everybody else is scared. So I'm going to slow down hiring. It's almost like when that happens across a community, an economy, or a country as large as ours, that's going to trickle into the business decisions. That's going to trickle into the psychology of buying things at the individual level. And, eventually things are going to slow down, right? So I think when we talk about an uncertain environment, you have to look at your individual situation and go, all right, compared to others, am I in a capital positive position where not only can I sustain, but can I invest in what I'm doing right now? Or should I be more conservative in how I'm going about my day to day? Again, either as an individual or a business leader, and just get through to the other side and just make sure I can get through to the other side. So I think it kind of depends on the individual's situation and the company's situation based on the industry that they're in.
Yeah, I think that's really important feedback, Tim, that it might be location specific, industry specific, but you can't just make a general, broad brush decision about what hiring looks like for your own organization until you really determine what the factors are, right? You could have some great opportunities to hire talent right now if you're still in a growth mode, right? Which could be the case.
Yeah, I think how I would be looking at this is, normally when everybody else is in dark times, in a dark mindset, they're tightening their belts, they're not spending money. Normally you could go say, all right, I'm going to go do this and I'm going to go invest in the future, right? And I think that is really, really, really good advice because these things don't last forever. Like, I run a recruiting business. I cannot believe that I'm dealing with this again. It wasn't 2019, it was 2018 when I started, but I have two economic, like, major situations that are happening in 4 years. I'm like, are you kidding me? But I've been through these cycles before, right? Like, whatever, time goes by, like, I go home, I go hang out with my kids and my wife, and like, lather, rinse, repeat. Then you pick your head up again, and then things kind of rebound, right? Then you're always kicking yourself for not making those investments or having confidence in that rebound, right? So I think if you're in a capital positive position, you're continuing to grow right now, I think now is a really, really good time to invest more in talent acquisition and maybe top grade your talent, or just make sure that you're retaining your current leaders. Like you don't want to go backwards and play whack-a-mole on the other side with retention issues, right? So I'd say yes, but I would say the general vibe right now is people are trying to figure out what their playbook should be in an uncertain environment, for sure.
Yeah, I think that last piece of guidance I would reiterate and put an exclamation point behind, and that is, make sure even if you tighten your belt with regard to hiring, that you're sending the right messages to your team about retention, so they don't start looking elsewhere because they believe that they're reading something into the health of your organization by the fact that you're not hiring.
One thing you could think about on your last point there. So, we had the Great Resignation, and I did things like this. And what's the Great Resignation? And what do you do? And all this kind of stuff. When things are really, really frothy, and there's just so much hiring going on and open jobs, it became a candidate market, right? So it was like unprecedented times where it didn't matter what occupation you were in or where you sat kind of in the economy or location for that matter now, right? Didn't matter if you were in a rural town with 5 total businesses. You could go find another job. You could go find something. There was people quitting their jobs, taking some time off and kind of going on to the next thing because there was confidence in the ability to do that. Now, I don't know. I don't know if you should be doing that, right? Hey, things aren't going great at work. I don't know. Maybe if this was 18 months ago, you could just like put your notice in and then just go on the job market and you go find your next opportunity. Probably better, probably more opportunity, more money, probably better benefits. That's just not the case right now. So I think you're going to start to see, and leaders should watch this, your current workforce maybe want to leave or quiet quit, right? But not have the opportunities to go on to the next. And we have to be evaluating that. How do we make sure that everyone feels safe? If we're in a position that we can make our employees feel safe and there's not going to be layoffs, then we need to be overemphasizing this. We need to be investing in our culture, right? Because I think there's going to be a time on the flip side, and we saw this in 2021, where those same employees that maybe didn't have those opportunities, it changes quick. They will, and then they're going to bounce on you, essentially. So invest that time and energy into your culture now, because when you're confident that you're going to grow, you don't want to be filling 20% of the seats because you had a bunch of people quit on you. Fill those and then try to grow. It's just much harder strategy.
So Tim, talk a little bit about salaries. I feel like it's been a Russian roulette game of, in terms of salaries in the last year, and even just trusting salary data and feeling like you've got, adequate information to set pay bands and set expectations around planning for salaries. So what are you seeing now? What do you think we should plan for 2023?
I think it was a really hot topic, 2021 into this year. So because of the Great Resignation, we're losing people that we don't want to lose, and they're going elsewhere. There was a dynamic where some companies that were able to do so just kind of jacked up the salary market, right? So let's just talk about the tech sector. That's where we play a lot. If you're a startup in Chicago and you're competing against Microsoft and Google and Facebook that are paying their software engineers $140,000, and you're normally paying $90,000, and now they have access to your talent that's sitting in your backyard because of remote working that they didn't have access to before, it causes a huge gyration in the market, right? And at a time where everything was frothy in Maryland and everything was good and there was a lot of confidence, right? So I think now it's starting to shift a little bit more. And I think we're more likely to go into a period of higher unemployment. I think we're going into a period of like not only your neighbor that's in the tech sector is going to lose their job, but probably other industries as well. And I think that's going to change the psychology. Again, this is all psychology, and people are going to not demand as much higher salary. Now, that being said, there's a couple other factors. Inflation's really high. If you're a business leader, you have employees just to live, go to the grocery store, fill up the gas tank, it's just a lot higher. So what are you doing in that context? I think you should kind of start there. Make sure that the current team members are in a good spot, getting kind of paid accordingly and increases accordingly. I think that's a responsible kind of baseline. And then you can start to look at, okay, how do I attract talent? Or if I'm having issues with companies leaving based on my salary bands, then I need to kind of rethink and look at those. I think salary was just a much larger variable over the last year or two because of the candidate-driven market, where I think under normal circumstances, there's salary, there's culture, there's the fit, there's the manager. I think everything was just, I could go make 20% more. Like I'm gonna go do that. And I think that was the psychology that was driven out of the market.
So you spoke to this a little bit ago already, but let's just delve a little bit deeper into. I think I almost heard you say the Great Resignation is over, or almost over, or a thing of the past or in the rearview mirror, which I think would be a welcome message to employers. But then this trend of quiet quitting and now quiet firing, would love to hear additional thoughts on that. if you think that's also going to be kind of wrapping up or moving on to the next chapter, if we're already there. Would love to get your input on that, because you seem to be having a really effective crystal ball or tea leaves that are working pretty well. So what do you think on those topics?
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, we probably have folks out in the audience right now who are like, what are you talking about? The labor market's still tight. Like in my company, in my industry, I still can't find people. Like unemployment is still low, right? I think we're seeing trends that'll dictate. We're trying to predict future behaviors and how we should kind of adopt different strategies. But I mean, yeah, the labor market's still really tight. We are seeing a decrease of people leaving their current employer, though. So when we talk about like the Great Resignation, everybody's leaving. Everyone's, the quiet quitting that they did in 2020 when they didn't really have any other opportunities to go find another job at, and now everyone's kind of doing it all at once. I think that kind of frenzy is starting to subside quite a bit. But that said, back to my earlier slides, the labor market's going to be tight for the foreseeable future, right? And I think companies in general need to invest more in things like retention strategies and culture to make sure that there's not quiet quitting kind of going on, and people are excited to kind of come to work and maybe get some referrals and bring some of their friends and family into that organization. But it's going to be tight, and you need to invest in talent acquisition to make sure that you're winning that war for talent. And I just think it's going to be a lot more tight than people realize, even if we have a short-term recessionary blip where on a micro level, it's going to go backwards a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's so important for employers to know, because I think there is maybe a false sense of this period is going to be over, and then all of a sudden it's going to be an employer's market again, and we're going to have lots of talent at our doorstep. And as you point out so adeptly, with all the economic indicators, it's not going to happen. Doubtful, really doubtful.
I think it's doubtful. I don't think we'll see, if things get really bad, I don't think we're going to see 6, 7, 8% unemployment. I just don't. Like, there's way too many people exiting the workforce right now, and our economy is just so large that I just think we have to get used to that, and some of the strategies to make sure that we're attracting the talent. And going back to the point, like what to do right now if you're a business leader or HR, if you're as a leader feeling uncertain and fearful, that's going to trickle down. That's going to trickle down. Your peers are going to see that, right? And I think the time for true leadership and that kind of like wartime CEO or wartime HR leader or wartime CFO, kind of putting that hat on, I think the transparency around what's going on in the business, is going to be very, very important, because if there's uncertainty at the C level or the director or VP level, there's definitely going to be uncertainty out in the field. And they just want to know. They don't want to be left in the dark about what's kind of going on. But I think more than ever, leadership needs to be locking arms right now, coming up with a strategy, whatever it is, based on the individual company and the individual industry that you're in and your financial situation. But you need to be locking arms, and people need to see that. And they need to see that you're in it. You're going to get to the other side. You're going to get through this, or you have a plan to get through it, right? And that'll trickle down to everybody else. And I think there's a lot of respect that comes with trust and transparency that I think gets lost. And in a period where there's uncertainty and fear and scarcity, I think it's like the easiest thing to do is just to not say anything or internalize some feelings as a leader. And I think that's the opposite of what you should be doing.
Absolutely. And so kind of to your point, I think I'm curious about like the difference in labor market. So, as you pointed out in some of your earlier slides, there is this just steady decline in available talent. Is that in certain sectors? Are you seeing a difference in maybe hourly employees versus salary employees? What kind of information do you think we should be looking at from those standpoints?
There's a huge labor shortage in hourly workers in the services sector, in manufacturing and distribution. So if I was in the staffing industry before starting my talent consulting business, right? And the Manpowers of the world, the Aerotechs of the world, the true staffing companies that are dealing with employees at that level, you can't find the talent. They're exiting the workforce, right? So in 2020, when these companies said, "See ya," we're shut down, see ya, right? What did they do? They found other gig economy opportunities, or they went to school, or they found opportunities to work from home. So it's really, really, really tough out there, and it's causing major supply chain issues because they don't have the workers kind of at that level, for sure. And I think that's going to continue. And I think there's unfortunately not an end in sight. And that's a major reason why we're having inflation right now, is because there's supply chain issues at the folks that used to make $12 an hour. They're now making 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 times thousands of people and millions of people across the country. And it's making the prices of everything kind of go up. If you're in the technology sector, I think, if we had this conversation a year ago, hey, I can't find any software engineers. I got to pay double for the software engineers, right? In that sector, I think it's subsiding a little bit, where there's a little bit more available talent, right? I think that's the only true sector that's going through a deeper recession right now. And the labor market dynamics that are coming from that are following, historically what we've seen before, which is like, hey, there's more available talent. So the supply and demand dynamics of that labor force is just going to be a little bit more open, right? I do feel like this is going to hit other industries. Like I think it's going to get a little bit tougher before it gets better, but I'll continue to hit on it. Doesn't last forever, right? So whatever strategy that you have as a leader, I think you have to have the end in mind and not think so short term. Like last year, you shouldn't be like, changing all your wages like crazy, because then, what if a recession hits? Now your cost of wage is way too high, for your business to operate. And right now, you shouldn't be making shorter term decisions. You should be thinking about the other side. But there's, depending on the industry, you're going to see some labor shortages or more available labor, depending.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just coming off a manufacturing conference that I got back from last night. And when I attended one of the CEO fishbowls, everyone's number one priority issue was talent. So I completely agree. That's what we're seeing in that, in that workforce, that there is just not these available candidates. They've been really, pressured to think a lot differently about their flexibility and maybe they're not going, looking at alternate. I think they've always had a place for contract labor, but they're thinking about it, in more places than they, traditionally employed contract labor.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, a little anecdote. Yesterday, I was facilitating an HR roundtable, and everyone was sharing their talent woes. And a number of our member organizations had raised their hourly rates to $18 an hour for entry-level unskilled labor. Don't really like the term unskilled anymore, but that's the job positions they're opening, getting very, very few candidates. And so really looking for creative ideas. We were brainstorming. And then we had other organizations in the roundtable who were starting to consider some reductions in force. And it's an interesting environment we're in right now, where, as you mentioned, it's industry specific, it's organization specific. I guess one of my questions is, are you seeing any techniques that are providing organizations with a competitive edge beyond entry level starting salaries? I mean, gone are the days where people are industry loyal, right? If people are only concerned about their base pay, they can go to any variety of industries and look for $1 or $2 more. But anything you're seeing with regard to how to perhaps get a competitive edge for your organization specifically or for your industry?
Sure. I think salary is always like a starting point for folks, but I think the reality is like it's more than that for people. They want to go to a place that's exciting, that they're going to be treated with owed and earned respect over time, treated like an adult, right? Receive positive reinforcement for times that they do something well, right? And I think that gets lost during like boom times, bust times, and things like that. So yeah, there might be some. I've seen everything. Huge sign-on bonuses or sign-on bonuses at the 90 days and 180-day mark, just to make sure that people are getting retained, or just this is a whole nother topic, like the HR kind of benefits landscape. Like I don't know if like one particular benefit moves the needle and like pushing someone from like not accepting a job to accepting a job, but it helps, right? I think my main point in answering your question is, with the advent of the internet, consumers, before we buy products or services, we go like research online about the product and maybe reviews and summaries and comparative kind of stuff based on other products. It's the same thing in talent acquisition. It's the same thing that's going on, right? And I think companies miss this a lot when they're trying to, you could build up a candidate pool all day, but are they going to get excited and accept your job? I think that's a different question. It's not all about salary. So we did a survey and we looked at some data based on our customers' Glassdoor reviews. So like I said, just like consumers, if a recruiter reaches out to a candidate, they don't respond to that email right away. What do? They Google the company. They see what videos are out there. They see what the Glassdoor reviews are saying, right? Like, you have to know this. You have to like invest in your talent brand, and you have to invest in your people that'll show up in these review sites. And I think that's often missed. So we found, this is the data point, we found that it takes 3 times longer. We have to talk to 3 times more candidates for a company that has poor Glassdoor reviews under a 3.5 out of 5 than a company that's above 4.0. You just got to talk to more people. It takes a lot longer, right? You're just kind of hoping that they don't see that. And the reason that those Glassdoor reviews aren't that good is because you're not treating the people well, right? So you got to go down to the root problem. Like, all this stuff becomes easier. And then it doesn't become like a salary thing as much anymore, like a silver bullet. Marilyn, like, I don't have an answer for you. Yeah, you just got to pay more. You got to do this. Like, I think it's a holistic approach in how you lead your people, and it'll work itself out over time.
Couldn't agree more.
Same. I did get one question about salary, like posting salaries. Do you believe that is something that, as you're recruiting, should you be posting the salary range that you're looking for?
That's a whole can of worms, Marilyn. You probably know this, just being in the HR space. So like, there's certain states now, and we have 170 team members. We have team members in 30 states, and we have clients in 25 states. There's certain states where you have to post a salary range for the job. Like, it's a requirement now, and you have to kind of work around that. Historically, if you haven't been in a recruiting department before, you don't want to like offer up the salary or kind of give a range, because your CFO and your hiring managers don't want you to, because they're working within budgets, right? So it's like, you're not trying to screw anybody over by like having a negotiation around this, right? So that's kind of the one side of the coin. The second side of the coin is like, if the candidate pool, especially in a tight market, if you don't have the salary there and it's not in alignment, they're either not going to respond at all because they don't have it. And if you put it out there, there's probably a benefit to like, hey, if the salary's not interesting to you and they don't respond, like, all good. Or if they do respond that I'm not interested based on the salary, like, all good, right? But when you put it there and they're like, yes, that's in line with what I'm looking for, you almost get there a little bit quicker. So when you're putting it in job postings, it's that same dynamic, right? If you put the salary in there, you should only get people, as long as they read that portion, you should only get candidates that are kind of within that and they know that from the get-go. But then it goes into, hey, should you have a larger range of the salary where you have kind of more wiggle room? But then what do people think in terms of salary when they see $60,000, $80,000? Where does their mind go where they should be at? They don't want to talk about 65, right? I don't have a perfect answer on that, but I think I would be looking at the supply and demand dynamics of the job that you're looking for. If you have more candidates for that particular job, post the salary, just get there quicker. And if you don't, it's going to be more of a strategic search. I wouldn't post the salary because you might have to have a conversation with your hiring manager around, hey, it's a tight labor market. I know you wanted a senior person at this, but would you take a junior person and maybe like build them up? Or do you have a team lead that can coach and train this person? It's not all about, here's a square peg, here's a round hole, make the match. Sometimes, especially in the tight market, you have to have discussions like that and think outside the box in terms of just talent as a whole.
Oh my gosh. Well, I can't believe we've only got a few minutes left, but I am going to sort of ask our final question. As leaders planning for 2023, what would you say is the one thing that you should be thinking about in terms of your talent strategy for next year?
I think if you're in a stable financial position, I would be investing through this because it's not going to last forever. And I think the companies that are being proactive, getting proactive candidate pools, top grading their talent, making sure they're keeping their current people, they always thrive on the other side of these things. The companies that are investing are going to thrive on the other side. It's just hard to, when the psychology around you is fear and scarcity and this, this could happen and stuff like that. But if you're confident in your business and your financial position based on the industry that you're in, I would be investing. If you're not as confident, I would be making budgetary forecasts around best case, worst case, medium case scenario. And I would be checking those on a monthly basis. And I would be leaning into my culture, right? Because whatever you think the worst case scenario is, it's typically not going to be that bad. And again, it doesn't last forever. So lock arms with your leadership, get through to the other side, invest in your people, and just make sure, if you're worried about your finances, you're putting your best foot first and optimizing the opposite side of this thing, because it's not going to last forever, even though it might be a little bit tough for a while.
Excellent advice. It's very interesting. We were just having this topic at our leadership team conversation right before this. So I feel a lot better about the decision we ended up with. So thank you so much, Tim. So we want to give people an opportunity. Parker, could you put up Tim's contact information? If you've got more questions, and I'm sure you do, Tim has graciously agreed to answer your questions. You can reach out to him on LinkedIn or via his email address, and just put business as unusual in the subject line so he knows that you're coming from our session today. So thank you so much, Tim. This was just, as we told you, it was going to go fast, and it certainly did. We're down to just a few minutes left. We want to also, say thank you to our sponsors. So we've got Insperity, and Insperity is a PEO, professional employer organization. And since 1986, they've been showing companies how to harness the power of HR to improve their business success. M3 Learning, and they're one of the most influential and successful sales training and sales management training companies worldwide. And then, of course, our friends at HR Source, and they're an association for employers, and they really help you manage your HR needs efficiently and economically, and then stay in legal compliance and maintain, to Tim's point, a happy, healthy employee population. So we will definitely be leaning into our friends at HR Source as we get into the next year. So want to give you guys a heads up as to what's coming in November. So we are going to be bringing our subject matter experts on these really critical topics back. So Tom Lederay, Mary Lynn will be back, and Joe Geary will be joining us to talk about what things you'd be considering for your 2023 trends. So we're going to be talking about sales, marketing, talent, and technology. And so, we'll be digging into what trends are just trendy and what things should be the musts in your 2023 plan. So please join us on November 17th for this really interesting panel discussion about prepping for next year. And then just thank you to everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your attendance and your support for our Business as Unusual. And thank you again to Mary Lynn and for Tim for being a part of today's session.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.